Welcome to this debating event. Ladies and gentlemen, the city of Kolkata and the state of West Bengal take pride in stating that we keep the art and tradition of debating alive. In many parts of this country, maybe in many parts of the world, this art is almost dying. But the people in this part of the world, that is in and around Kolkata, who are perfect examples of the argumentative Indians, have kept this art alive. And in doing so, this debate would be a sampler of an intellectual combat of a different nature. In keeping this whole story and the episode of debating going, CDC, that's the Calcutta Debating Circle, has played an important part. Two individuals, Dr. Shondeep Chatterjee and Dr. Kunal Sarkar, have been at the helm of CDC. And it has been my pride and privilege to be associated with them since my school and college days, debating on many occasions. And in the last few years, Lions have been partnering with CDC as part of youth empowerment programs and as part of the duties for discussions on socially relevant issues. CDC organizes the so-called Festival of the Spoken Word annually, with speakers from different parts of the world, and Lions have partnered with them. We even had a debate at the Isame Forum organized at Kolkata in 2017. Now, getting on to this debate, the topic for this debate is, in the opinion of the House, newspapers are dead, TV is dying, long live the social media. And we have four speakers. Mr. Rudrangshu Mukherjee, who is known for his mature and experienced perspective. Thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation and being a part of this debate. Dr. Kunal Sarkar, who despite his various engagements on various panels to combat COVID-19 and his professional assignments, has found time to be with us today. Thank you, Dr. Sarkar. Rajdeep Sardesai, who is tied up in keeping the regular supply of real news to the nation, distinctly different from the noise that we sometimes hear. You still could find time to be with us. Thank you, Rajdeep. And Mr. Babul Supriyo, who is a minister and a member of the parliament from West Bengal. His voice truly sings the emotions and the sentiments of the youth. And finally, we have the chairperson for today's debate, Dr. Shondeep Chatterjee, the neurosurgeon, whom we literally and metaphorically trust to keep the head held high in such debates. In your hands, Dr. Chatterjee, we place the proceedings of this debate.
Good evening and welcome to the Lions debate. Today we have a motion which reads, this House believes newspapers are dying, television is sick, long live social media. And speaking today, we have a galaxy of speakers. Speaking for the motion, we have Dr. Kunal Sarkar. Kunal is a heart surgeon turned debater who used to cut through the matter of the heart. Now he cuts through the heart of the matter. Also speaking for the motion, we have Dr. Rudrangshu Mukherjee, who is a newspaper editor turned chancellor, who expressed his opinions before, now hears the expressions of others' opinions. Speaking against the motion, Mr. Rajdeep Sardesai, well-known TV personality, who batted for St. Xavier's and Oxford before, now bowls out viewers for various television channels. And speaking against the motion, Babul Supriyo. Mr. Babul Supriyo is an honorable member of the Lok Sabha. He's a singer turned politician who sang before to your tunes and now wants you to sing to his. With that very brief introduction, we will go into the motion, which is about newspapers and television versus social media. You know for a fact that an incident, when viewed in isolation, is information. Information presented through writings of a reporter or expressions of a TV commentator becomes news. Delivered by instantaneous recording and dissemination in geometrical progression is social media. Where are we vis-a-vis which is more apt in the world today? Without much ado, I will get the first speaker for the motion, Dr. Kunal Sarkar, to give his opinion. And for the first round of opinion, he has 6 minutes, starting now.
Thank you, Shandip. Friends, Mr. Chairman, co-speakers, a warm welcome from the city where 240 years ago, a failed surgeon launched, an Irish failed surgeon launched the first newspaper of Asia, James Augustus Hickey. And ever since then, a lot of water has gone down the bridge as far as the media and newspapers are concerned. The way we are compelled to look at the motion today, it almost looks like, a respiratory care ward round. Somebody is terribly sick and dying on the ventilator. The second person is perhaps a little bit better, but looks awfully sick. And the third person has a lot of lifestyle problems, but apparently is kind of chirpy and moving around at this point of time. Friends, we have been addicted to the newspaper for all our lives, but they have been playing a very, very difficult game. They seem to have fallen off the trapeze in the last few years. They followed a very dangerous business plan. Something that takes about 25 rupees to manufacture, they tried to flog it to the customer for about between 2 to 3 rupees. And the huge financial deficit was made up either in form of subsidy or in the form of high-priced advertisements. And in the end of it all, what happened is the newspapers succumbed to this vicious cycle of advertisement dependency, of inevitable cronyism. And at the end of it, they had a brilliant sort of a soaking up ad plan from the industry, but they were seriously compromised on their objectivity, on their ability to analyze, on the quality of content. And with this serious financial pressure, great talents who embellished the newspaper industry for many, many years really deserted the industry, almost like the flock following Moses. So this is the problem. It is not just a problem of cash. It is a problem of cash which has translated itself into a problem of content. It has translated in itself into a problem of talent. And this is a pathetic manifestation that we hold in front of our eyes every morning, almost unfailingly. So what interventions are you going to do? Change the business plan? Inject a lot of cash? How on earth are you going to get the talent which has deserted the industry? Is something for all of us to ponder about. Now let's talk about television a little bit. Television, if newspapers have attempted to walk on water, television has been walking on thin ice. They also, when I talk about television, of course we are focusing on the Indian media in particular. And television has been walking on thin ice because so far, and especially English language television, has almost been either a political surrogate or news channels. Out of 900 television channels in India, a great majority of them are probably news channels. And most of these news channels, with pretty shallow pockets, ends up in being somebody's pocket or the other. So yes, we do switch on to television. We select our language. We get glued on to the very interesting, the breaking news, which almost looks like a flatulence of information now and then. Reminds you of sort of, breaking news line, breaking wind every few minutes. But the problem is, with the increasing number of channels and with the very dubious kind of precarious kind of business plan, once again, the ability of the television channels to be objective, to be analytical is going away. My cable operator is a very wise fellow. He lines up the Republic and the BBC next to one another. So I have an option at the flick of a button to choose between the malignant right and the incorrigible left. Right. So such is the sway in the information in the world of today. Social media, by no means. Social media is there, it is bubbling, it looks chirpy. But through newspapers, through television, through social media, we the subscribers, we the readers, we the listeners, we the viewers, are also a part of this vicious cycle because we have greatly encouraged this entire business of getting something for nothing. We've almost got into the habit of demanding content without paying for it. When back in London, you spend about £10 to watch a television match, we expect to get a month of news viewing for 50 paisa a night, 50 paisa a month. So if we get into the age-old paradigm of the peanuts and the monkeys. So when we approach the motion today, we do not approach the motion with a kind of, we are not trying to rejoice at the kind of malady, the difficulty
that, have 1 minute to
that the conventional media is in. We've had enough of Trumpism. So what we want to say is, let us not add to one more dictionary of Trumpism and describe the most lethal pandemic the world has known as just another flu. We want to preserve the conventional media industry. We want the substance to remain in the newspapers. We want television to come to us with all its information, analysis, wisdom, breaking news and everything, but with objectivity, but with credibility, but with integrity. So I think we on this side of the house propose this topic, but we propose the motion, not with any kind of rejoicement, but with introspection. And we want that all of us spends the next few minutes trying to look into the fundamentals of this problem. So if Jesus Christ could, then Indian media can attempt at a substantial resurrection. Thank you.
Thank you, Kunal. When you talked about eminent personalities letting the newspapers, I hope you were not referring to your fellow speaker particularly. Speaking against the motion and leading the side against Mr. Rajdeep Sardesai. Rajdeep, all yours. You have 6 minutes starting now.
Thank you very much. I think at the very outset, let me say Dr. Sarkar almost has conceded when he says that he is embracing this proposition not with a sense of rejoicement, but with a sense of introspection. It's almost as if he recognizes that he would love to have his newspaper with his cup of chai. He would love to watch his favorite TV news channel, but yet he is constrained to speak in support of the proposition. And he has chosen to do so by looking at typically the glass half empty. I am going to speak for the against the proposition in the belief that the glass is half full. I really do think that a proposition to suggest that newspapers are dying and television is sick is essentially a proposition based on caricaturing both these mediums and living in a kind of a make-believe fantasy world when the reality we know is very, very different. Newspapers are dying. Really, Dr. Sarkar, Mr. Mukherjee? Just look at the national readership figures that show that newspaper readership, like it or not, is actually growing. It may not be growing to the extent that one would have hoped in the English language, but look at the regional language. And that is one of the key points I want to make. This debate cannot be shaped in terms of what the Calcutta Club wants to read or wants to see. It must be looked at in a wider universe in a subcontinental sized country like India. And once you look at that, you recognize that regional newspapers in particular are actually flourishing at the moment. They are expanding. The Dainik Bhaskars, the Dainik Jagrans are expanding all the time. And in every regional language, you will have equivalents. Just take a look at what is happening in Mumbai at the moment. Because of Corona, the Delivery Boys Union has not been delivering newspapers. And look at the anxiety, the anger, and dare I say, sense of deprivation amongst a variety of people, anecdotally. All of them hankering for their newspapers to the point where they are seeking the newspaper through a PDF on WhatsApp. It clearly suggests that there is a deep desire to read a newspaper physically, to hold it in your hand. That experience is something which has been cultivated over years. And therefore you cannot, as Mark Twain suggested, reports of our death are grossly exaggerated. And that is the case with the Indian newspaper without a shadow of the doubt. Because, importantly, the trust factor. People trust what they read in a newspaper. There may be a crisis of content, but even so, people still value what they read the next morning. It almost validates what you heard in the news the night before. That's the role that a newspaper increasingly plays. Television is sick. Really, my friends? We have 190 million cable and satellite homes in the country. Assume every home has 4 or 5 people. Effectively, television, and that's just cable and satellite, is almost covering every home in a nation of 1.3 billion people. Not only is a Hindi channel like Aaj Tak the most profitable in the country, but it's also the most widely watched in the world. Can you really then call it a sick industry? An industry where today you have almost 400 regional news channels, along with, of course, the English news channels. Please do not judge an entire country, and that's where I come back to it, by what the Calcutta Club would like to see. Do not believe that in this great republic, no pun intended, we do not have good journalism on TV as well. We have a loyal viewership, and the visual of a TV image is a powerful magnet. Its impact is unimaginable. Let's be very clear. The government of India and several state governments have woken to the crisis of migrants walking home hundreds of kilometers only after they saw the images of the destitute and the deprived on TV. That's the power of TV. When you have this kind of power, you cannot certainly suggest that television in any way is dying or is sick, as is being suggested by the proposition. I also want to remind you that every newspaper and news channel also increasingly has a strong online presence. So it's a multimedia world in which we live. Contrast that with social media, which you seek to promote here. It doesn't have the weight and credibility of a newspaper, nor does it have the impact of a TV image. There is no doubt a generation that's growing on a diet of Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, but it's a sea in which you can easily drown because there is no anchor to hold it together. There is no verification that takes place in the world of social media as it does in the world of newspaper. It's a world where sensation triumphs over sense, where you get a Twitter hashtag by making it more provocative, where on Facebook, you can put all the fake news in the world, push all the propaganda in the world with no checks and balances. That's the big difference between social media, which exists almost in an amorphous world with no checks and balances, and the world of TV and print, where at the end of the day, there is an element of responsibility, there is an element of accountability. Please do not judge us by what a couple of channels do when they, in a way, substitute news with noise. The fact is that we live in a plural society, in a plural, multifaceted society. And in that society, it requires a newspaper and a television channel to really act as genuine purveyors of credible information. Social media can never be a replacement for TV. It can never be a replacement for a newspaper. The fact at the end of the day is, if you want to live in a world with context, you will need TV and newspapers. If you don't want to live in a world with context, you can embrace the world of social media and say, long live social media. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rajdeep. I think that pretty much has set the basis of this debate. We heard Dr. Sarkar talk about quality being something that was suffering because of the way our newspapers and our television channels portrayed news. Rajdeep countered that very confidently by saying that it isn't quantity. Look at quality. Look at not quality only. Look at quantity. Don't rely on the quality of a few television channels that substitute news with noise. But look at the number of people that are looking at these visuals, that are reading these newspapers. You know, ladies and gentlemen, newspaper reporters, I was always told, see and report events. Columnists can construct and convolute the same events, and editors decide to emphasize or eliminate the same from their front pages, depending on their political and other convictions. Television reporters sensationalize. Their editors are either then super spreaders or super suppressors, to borrow two current phrases from virology. But social media aims to replicate by going viral, as it were. And as we just heard, without checks and balances. And really, what going viral means is something I've actually realized only in the last 2 months. Which is more reliable? To answer that question and take up arms in favor of the motion, the next speaker, Dr. Rudrangshu Mukherjee.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I know for some television anchors, it is very difficult to understand the word introspection. It doesn't come to them very easily. Therefore, they go to numbers. How many people are watching? How many people are reading the newspaper? Whether they're reading it or not, we don't know. The fact that they are subscribing to it or taking it doesn't mean that they are reading it. So these numbers actually mean nothing. I can be sipping my, people can be sipping their evening whiskey and seeing Rajdeep Sardesai screaming on the screen, or some of his other colleagues, former colleagues I might add, who are now shouting also, may not be listening at all. It's just a pastime in the evening, particularly when you are locked down at home, to spend time. It means nothing. It means nothing. Newspapers are dying for the simple reason that they have lost their objectivity. All newspapers peddle a particular political party's line. The party can vary from region to region. The party can vary from the owner's predilections. So they actually peddle news according to their ideological orientation. That is why newspapers are dying. Newspapers are not dying because their numbers are falling. The numbers may not be falling. Though in English language newspapers, numbers are falling, not in regional languages. I'll concede that point to Mr. Sardesai. But my point is, it has nothing to do with numbers. Newspapers are dying because they have lost their credibility completely. They have lost their credibility because owners of newspapers and editors of newspapers have sold their spine for little less than 30 pieces of silver to political parties and political masters. And may I add, to one political party particularly, and we will have a spokesman of that party speaking last in this debate. So that is one reason why newspapers have lost why newspapers are dying, and because they have lost their credibility. Nothing to do with numbers here. Second is, television has always been sick. It has nothing to do with today. Mr. Rajiv Sardesai will kindly remember that there was a time, and his memory is very strong, I know, there was a time when Indian jawans and soldiers got killed in Kargil because somebody was actually, a very star television reporter was actually using a satellite phone to talk to them so that the enemies could actually know through that where the soldiers were located. Similarly with what happened in the Taj Hotel in Bombay. If that is not sick, I don't know what is sick. Because television pursues sensationalism. That is at the core of television journalism. It highlights beyond proportion, beyond context, because it is only looking, again, something that Mr. Sardesai emphasized, numbers. How can I get my ratings up? How can I get my viewership up? Doesn't matter what it does to the wider world. So my point is, television has always been sick. It is the nature of the beast that it is sick. It is not because one particular TV anchor who is now, I think he's the first TV anchor who's actually had criminal charges against him. One particular TV anchor shouts and doesn't let anybody else speak. Okay, it has nothing to do with that. That's a particular intense intense symptom of a sickness, which is more pervasive than when one individual. And also, perhaps TV anchors do not know the meaning of the word sarcasm. But when they come to a debate panel, they should know it, because sarcasm is one of the rhetorical devices all debaters use. Long live social media need not be an exaltation of social media. It actually is a sarcastic statement. Something that lives long doesn't necessarily is welcome. Longevity can in fact be a curse. And that is what social media is. It is a curse. It will continue to live. It will continue to survive. But it will continue to survive because the society that has produced that social media, like the society that has produced television, like the society that has produced craven newspapers, is sick. That is why. That is why newspapers are dying. That is why television channels are sick. And that is why social media will continue to live long. We don't want it to live long. Certainly not in the way that it lives long today. We don't want it to live long. But it is a sarcastic statement, Mr. Sardesai. I hope you will understand it. And one small point, a parting provocation, if you like. I didn't understand the 4 or 5 references to Calcutta Club. Is that the universe we are talking about, the Calcutta Club? Where does Calcutta Club come in here? It's a Lions Club debate. Rajdeep, next time you come to Calcutta Club, I'll see to it my 2 friends, the 2 doctors on this panel who are members of the Calcutta Club, propose you for a membership. Maybe then in a debate you won't keep on referring to Calcutta Club. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rudrangshu. I think I love the reference to the human spine. As a neurosurgeon, I was intrigued by Rudrangshu's comment that all people that use newspapers have sold their spine. And I wonder whether those that use social media have actually bought their brains. But to answer that question, if you tell you more about who works at a spinal level and who works at a brain level, and none other than a member of parliament who have obviously, we assume, both minds and brains, Mr. Babul Shukri.
First of all, good evening, everyone. It's a great honor to be part of this Lions Club debate, especially, given the fact that I know that all four of us are married, and yet Lions Club continue to call themselves lions, after spending so much of time inside the room with their wives and getting, I'm sure they're getting pretty, wildly reprimanded by their wives. So on a lighter note, I don't think there is too much of seriousness to be showered and too much of a need to get very angry and passionate about what this for the motion or against the motion is. Because I think in today's world, if there is social media, there will be social media. If newspaper has always been, it has been part of our existence. It will always be there, and so will television, news and news channels from the time we have started watching it and have made it part of our lives. I genuinely feel that this particular topic that you have, it has to be broken down into two parts. One, are you saying newspaper and television is sick because in terms of content, or are you saying that they are sick in terms of finances? Now, if you talk about finances, then I'll definitely say that newspapers and television channels, they appear to be sick because of what Kunalda said while speaking for the motion, because that particular notion of wanting to sell a newspaper for 3 rupees to make it cheap, and then wanting to earn 35 rupees because that's how much you would probably need to print one newspaper with all the content and the incidental expenses and all of that. So I feel that financially the base of newspaper and news channels have always been on a very shady financial model. So that is going to go up and down. The question is whether newspapers and news channels are sick, or whether we should get ourselves totally relying on social media. I absolutely disagree to that. I think news channels and newspapers again need to be broken down into two different colors. One about straight black and white journalism, whether it is newspaper or television channel, and the other is yellow journalism. And like responsible social media writers, there are going to be yellow channels and there are going to be black and white channels. One who would show a breaking news with the dignity of being a news channel without playing a background music to it, or where the anchors, and I'm not definitely speaking about one particular anchor, the anchors are not going to come to a debate with pre-decided notions about how they want to conduct it, and which particular political party or which party in the debate is going to get more time to speak or establish their own logic. Having said that, I genuinely feel that in the days of things getting digitalized, I think newspapers, the number of newspapers in terms of print newspapers, hard copy print newspapers getting sold may not be the right parameter to look at how difficult a newspaper might be on a financial platform, because I think lot of these newspapers have now moved into apps. A lot of TV channels have moved into apps, and trust me, the number of ads that you get to see which pop up on your screen will definitely need to be considered while Kunalda does that mathematics of or mathematics, since we have a brain surgeon here, to understand why Rajiv Sardesai or the other news channels. Rajiv very smartly put in the Aaj Tak plugin as being the #1 channel in India, but that is exactly what it is. He can say that because the newspapers or the news channels are thriving with the kind of news they are producing. We are never going to get a substitute of that. In musical terms, I may say that social media is the way it reacts. People react to what they see on newspapers and on television. Social media, yes, there are fake news that go around. All of us have been guilty to putting some kind of news which may not be correct. Myself, Rajdeep, who are in the media, are very often subjected to very different kinds of trolling because of the kind of news that we put out, which many would want. It would depend on their like as to whether they want to believe it or not. But social media, in many ways than one, is to me, a sur or a rag being given to a singer, and then you make a vistar on that. Like Rudrangshuda, he said, he's talking about newspapers, credibility and all of that, and political, and he mentioned my party. So I'll have to say whether Rudrangshuda is reading the newspapers in Kolkata, and I'll name them, whether it is Anandabazar, Telegraph, Bortoman, Ajkal, Times of India. I would want you to mention one newspaper who reports what they should report and not follow what Ted Turner once said, that the job of a news channel is to make news out of nothing. So these newspapers have decided to take a particular side because probably their finances are based on how much government ad they get. But I think it is basically the spine. Coming back to neurosurgery, it is basically about the spine and the heart that you have, about your own self-respect and how you want to portray your newspaper in the eyes of the people. People do judge the kind of headlines that you give. People do judge you, and they give you the the points in terms of credibility. But you cannot take a newspaper away from people's lives. It will always exist. And I, as an old school guy, I think even in the new school, people really want to read newspapers from the hard copy, as you see in airports or even in homes. We love to read that. But you leave social media to, say, Rudrangshuda. He is the owner of that newspaper. He's also the editor of that newspaper. So he may write whatever he feels like. He'll write it from his heart. But that doesn't mean that it is going to go through a credibility test. The credibility test will happen in terms of Rudrangshuda's personality, not in terms of the kind of news that he is trying to put on social media. So I definitely do not believe that social media can ever take away the credit of newspapers, or can take away the place that newspapers or news channels, they occupy in your lives. Rather, social media, as they say, in many ways is really the toilet of the internet, where people, when they want to write something, just go ahead and write it, because you will always find a partisan crowd. You'll always find people who are going to support you, even if you are 100% wrong. And that's what social media is. It just makes you a better person. It helps your anger management. It helps your patience. I do not know if that makes you a thick-skinned person or an insensitive person. But as Arun Jaitley ji has really put it, social media, either if you're in it, you will either have to digest it or be out of it. But social media is definitely not a replacement to news channels and newspapers. Though newspapers and news channels, many of them not all have decided to take particular political stands and particular editorial narratives, given the financial platform on which they stand. But that's not the case with every channel and newspaper. So my respect for newspapers and news channels, maybe in bits and pieces at times, given the kind of news that they want to portray on the first page and do not want to portray on first page. But it is always there. It is always going to be there. And I hope social media do not one day drown the voices, the same voices that exist in television, journalism and print journalism. That's my only hope, that social media should not be our way. It could be our way to react, but it should not be the way we get access to news and what is happening in the society around us. Thank you so much.
Rahul. What I was saying is that what we've heard so far is that the proposition has told us that the problem with newspapers and television today is that to survive, they have to look after their own interest first, rather than the interest of their readers and viewers. They have to do as dictated by their political and financial masters. Hence their credibility, hence their integrity, and therefore their necessity itself is questionable. The speakers on the other side have told us that fine, newspapers are subject to editorial, political, administrative control. TV is also subject to the similar type of control. But what about social media? Social media is controlled by fads, feelings, fear or fury, by the fingers of the man or woman who immediately reacts to a situation. Is that safe? Is that more reliable? To answer these questions, we will have the speakers have a second round where they can get an opportunity to voice their opinion. And I'm afraid you get about 2.5 minutes each to be very quick, to make a very important point that you may have missed or which you think has come up in the course of this debate. Same order, Dr. Kunal Sarkar for the motion first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. From what we've heard from the opposition thus far, you see, Rajdeep very passionately, he tells us everything that the print and the television media should be. You know, we agree with him in word and spirit, and just tell him that the untenable, that the harsh reality of today, the unviable business model that both the television and the newspapers seems to be following, do not allow them to be so. It is necessitating a credibility deficit, an objectivity deficit, and that is what is hurting the readers pretty hard. Numbers, I'm told, are a disadvantage as far as newspapers are concerned. They want to go to the optimum. They never want to explore the maximum. And out of 900 odd television channels, news channels we have in our country, honestly, if we can only sort of eulogize Aaj Tak as the only profit-making one, then I would definitely be worried about the future of that industry. We treasure newspapers, we treasure television. Babul has told us, yes, absolutely candidly about everything which is wrong with social media. But the question is that social media has occupied the space of discussion that has been left vacant by both the madness in television just to break news. And Babul, you've perhaps seen, you've been away from Kolkata perhaps for a few days. In Kolkata, we don't call that bias. We call that anuprerana. We call it inspiration. So inspiration in Kolkata drives us to do many funny things. And that inspiration is again a syndrome of your financial fallibility, of the compulsion that all electronic and print media is subject to. So ladies and gentlemen, in the summary of it all, we speak for a country where about 65% of the population is under 30 years of age. And that demography, that population seems to be blissfully disconnected from the print media and from the television media that we would want them to be. So let the credibility come back, let the content come back, and let both these industries stand viably as a standalone, viable media platforms. Thank you.
Rajdeep, you have 2.5 minutes to respond to that.
Thank you very much. Listening both to Dr. Sarkar and Dr. Mukherjee, I'm reminded of what Mallory famously said when he was asked, why do you want to climb Mount Everest? And his retort was, because it's
George
there.
Mallory.
That's right. You know, the reason why he said it, he said because it's there. The fact is, newspapers and television are part of our lives in a manner that social media cannot be. I was listening to Rudrangshu Mukherjee, and I sensed in what Rudrangshu was saying a certain lament and nostalgia for the past. As a good old newspaper man, he wanted to almost return to a golden age. I'm not saying that the golden age of newspapers exists today, but it's there. The age of newspapers hasn't disappeared. Remember, the proposition is newspapers are dying. You could argue newspapers are not in the golden age, but to suggest they are dying is to take another extreme position. Similarly, when Rudrangshu chooses to target all his venom on television, he is perfectly entitled to do so. but he fails to recognize that television channels are part of our lives. Now, to suggest that something that is so intrinsic to your lives is sick, something which you are longing for is dying, is, I think, as I said, living in a slightly make-believe world. And Rudrangshu goes on to say that long live social media is a sarcastic comment. I don't think it is. I think it was meant to suggest that social media is the new kid in the block, that it's this chirpy kid, as Dr. Kunal Sarkar called it. Do you really want your kid to be a kid who grows up on a diet of fake news, of counterfeit news? And let me make this one last point. When Dr. Mukherjee says that newspapers and television channels can in a way be compromised by the ruling party, he's right. But what about social media? Look at the troll armies. Look at the manner in which political parties try and throw up false narratives on social media, because this is an open source. There is no control. There are no checks and balances. And that's the reason why I say that even if you lament the end of the golden age of newspapers, even if you're demonizing television channels, they're there. The challenge is to improve them, not to replace them. The proposition seems to want to replace them with social media. I say let's all work collectively to get better quality newspapers, better quality television news channels back. That's the challenge of our times.
Thank you. Thank you. Rudrangshu, your job is all laid out for you. You have 2.5.
I don't think I'll need the 2.5 minutes. I'll just make 3 quick points. One is newspapers are dying. I made the point earlier, but there's one dimension which nobody touched upon. This is one of the first periods of crisis, this lockdown that's happened. One of the first periods of very major crisis that the newspapers have faced. In India, what have newspapers done? They have cut pages, they have cut staff. That is the sign of an oncoming death, if you want. The papers are now really paper thin. The newspapers are now really paper thin. So that is one point I want to make, a symptom of dying, right? Rajdeep, yes, unfortunately, television is a part of our lives. We cannot deny that. But so is the virus at the moment a part of our life. Do we need to extol that virus because it is a part of our life? We don't. We shouldn't, most importantly. And those who framed this motion of this debate, I don't know what they meant when they said long live social media. As a debater, I am free to interpret it in the way I want to, what suits me best, and I interpreted it as a piece of very heavy sarcasm. Thank you.
Very much. Babul, you have the last word.
My time starts now. So, I think that social media, newspapers, and news channels should coexist, because no matter what you say, news channels, newspapers, they too create a narrative that they wish to. And that narrative that they fix is very much, decided by the Anuprerana, which obviously comes with its own economics. So, which supports a newspaper, lets it survive, and keeps its balance sheet close to making it a functional unit. So that is the politically putting, whether we mince words or we don't, we know what Anuprerana really means in Bengal. I hope that doesn't stay once we take that same Anuprerana into social media and ask people to do a vistar on it, like I'm talking about in music, you give a rag and ask the singer to do a vistar on it. I feel that in social media, one has got the power. It has given you the power to express your own views. A newspaper might not get away. It cannot get away by imprinting or propagating or narrating something which is not true, something which is they're doing for vested interests or for financial or Anuprerana interests. You have the social media where you can vent your view, where you can vent your frustration. You can also express your anger. But I genuinely feel that your future should not at all be dependent on what you're writing or how you're reacting to social media, because I think the best of people in the entire world, they have all lived the age of newspapers. They have all digested what they have been written about them, against them. They have seen news channels. We did Kishore Kumar, Lata Mangeshkar, Sachin Tendulkar, Kapil Dev, Gavaskar did not have social media during their times. Yet Sachin had it at the later part of his career. But I think being dependent on social media or writing a comment on that and then going and see what people may have written against you, because they have been employed by certain people to write that against you, it will only make you a person who cannot handle time or is bad at time management. So social media, you have to write and then you have to leave. If you really believe in something, you may write that and then you go and you can have someone else just read out the positive responses to it. But social media, definitely, you cannot say it is rocking and long live social media. The question is whether we say or not, like George Mallory's reference taken by Rajdeep, it is there and therefore you need to climb it. Social media is there, it is going to be there, it has become part of your lives. You will have to either accept the way it is, but you cannot say this definitely got a long life. It is going to have a long life in the future as well, but that will not be a replacement to newspaper and news channels, because they must coexist, or else this universe of news making, social media, whatever, which is a mirror of the society, that will become really news is going to be is going to be turned into, or is going to be more vulnerable to be called the toilet of the internet, where you can just go ahead and write anything and people are only going to be left reading to that with the absence of newspapers and television channels. So it's a coexistence of the good and the evil, but definitely not that newspaper and news channels are sick and must die at some point and social media is going to long live. I don't believe in that. And I definitely feel that the topic of this today's debate, the motion, is very loose. No pun is intended, and I don't think that is something that we have people with a heart and a brain. I'm sure they are not going to support that either. So that's what it is. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much. It was once again a great experience to be part of this debate.
Thank you very much. That really brings us to the end of what the speakers have had to say, and I just is left upon me to just cast some final summarizing thoughts on the motion. I think one aspect of the newspapers and televisions, which I would have thought would have been highlighted, was the fact that newspapers and TV channels have time. So they have time to digest the news, they have time to absorb the news, they have time to understand the implications of dissemination of the news before they disseminate the news. Whereas with social media, I think it's more of a knee-jerk reaction, a medium which aims to spread news or something that it considers newsworthy without understanding its significance in time and space. And as a man of science, if I say that's what Einstein's theory of special relativity was about, that time changes the way we see events in space. So social media depicts lightning as something that illuminates the darkness of the sky, whereas conventional media probably report on the effect of the thunderstorm. Social media is a mode of reacting. If Kunal says he's going to invite me to his house for dinner and forgets, I immediately write a disparaging comment about Kunal on social media, because it's my sudden reaction, and that goes to a lot of Kunal's friends. And it perhaps is not necessary, because what's happened is Kunal's been stuck in a major surgery, and that's why he has not invited me for dinner. But I perceive it as a personal affront, and I give vent to my feelings on social media immediately. And I think that's one point that could have come up in the debate. The other thing, of course, is the question of curbs and suppressions. We've certainly heard a lot about this, the fact that newspapers and TV channels have their information intercepted, interpreted, reinterpreted, often represented by their political masters. Whereas for social media, it is not subject to political jurisdiction. But is that true? We know from recent events, if political masters do not like what's disseminating on social media, they can block the internet. Is no news then better than manipulated news? And I think that's a point to consider. And finally, I think the topic is a lot about the similarity with the story of the 5 blind men and the elephant. You know, in a newspaper, you have to mention the animal when you refer to its trunk or tail. On television, you can get to see a part of the creature. You can exhibit its tail, but you have to take a shot and show us that there is an animal there. But in social media, you can just cleverly show the tusk of the animal and pass it off as a sword, because your interpretation then travels faster in geometrical progression across time and space. And that spreads faster than the ability of the human mind to comprehend what it is. And I think that's another danger of social media. But all in all, it's been a very balanced debate. We have heard people explaining clearly why we will still need newspapers, and we will still have Rajdeep Sardesai talk to us on television, and we will still need to read and hear each of them. But today, we will also have social media living side by side. Though the grammar of social media is a little different from the grammar of conventional media, because in social media, the object of the news becomes the subject, and this abolishes all grammar of the conventional media. But they all have to exist side by side. Thank you very much, Kunal, Rudrangshu, Rajdeep, and Babul, for sparing your time in these COVID days. It's been a great debate. Thank you very much.
Wow, wasn't that wonderful? What a great debate we had. And what else can you expect when the session is being moderated by somebody like Dr. Shondeep Chatterjee? Speakers like Mr. Rajdeep Sardesai, Mr. Rudrangshu Mukherjee, Mr. Babul Supriyo, and of course, Dr. Kunal Sarkar. Before we go on, why don't we do a poll here? On the chat box, if you believe in the motion, type a yes. And if you believe that the motion should be defeated, type a no. And we will see what the results are. On behalf of the Lions of Multiple District 322 and the Calcutta Debating Circle, we would like to thank each one of you, the speakers, for being there, for taking out time from your busy schedule and giving time to the Lions and to this multiple convention which we are hosting via the virtual platform. My dear friends, the sky is the limit. Who would have believed that we could have a debate on a virtual platform? But today it was done. Thank you, each one of you, for coming and joining us and for being here. And I'm sure you'll go back with lots of excitement, a new thought process, and of course, with the words of the speakers ringing in your ears.